In the chill of early autumn, when fog clung to barren hills like tattered shrouds, a battered van rumbled along a forgotten road into Harrow's End. A remote village whispered about in hushed tones among the curious and the damned. The documentary crew, led by the determined director Emily, with Mark handling the camera and Sarah meticulously researching every rumor, arrived on a day that felt as if it were carved out of an ancient nightmare. Harrow's End lay nestled between dense, gnarled woods and crumbling stone ruins. The village's houses, built from weathered timber and rough-hewn stone, huddled together as if protecting long-held secrets. The few inhabitants, gaunt and somber, moved with an almost ritualistic precision. Their smiles were slight, eyes guarded, and every glance hinted at an unspoken pact with an unseen force. That very afternoon, the crew was introduced to Obadiah, the village elder. His voice, low and trembling with a mix of reverence and sorrow, recounted the legend of the faceless children. "They are a blessing from the hollow God," he intoned, his eyes alight with both conviction and despair. "Every child born without a face carries with it a promise, a sacrifice to keep an ancient evil asleep. Every 50 years we surrender our newborns' identities, so that our God remains in his slumber." The crew began their work with a series of interviews. In the central square, a crowd gathered to watch a newborn toddle past, a child without any discernible features, as if its face had been erased by some unseen hand. The villagers' acceptance was unnerving. To them, the facelessness was not a deformity, but a sacred mark of divine favor. Mark's camera lingered on the child's blank visage, capturing a moment that felt both surreal and foreboding. Later that day, Sarah took refuge in a dusty, neglected library tucked away behind a crumbling chapel. Among brittle manuscripts and faded drawings, she uncovered records that painted a darker picture of the ritual. These texts told of a covenant, a 50-year cycle during which the villagers willingly surrendered the individual identities of their newborns. The sacrifice was essential to placate an ancient entity, a being whose dormant power, if stirred, could wreak untold havoc. As twilight deepened into a starless night, the team set out to film the ancient stone altar said to be the heart of the ritual. Nestled in a clearing beneath towering oaks, the altar exuded an eerie aura of foreboding. Mark, ever the seeker of truth, adjusted his camera for a better angle. In a moment of distracted awe, his lens captured the image of a lone, faceless child lurking at the edge of the clearing. The flash of his camera, a brief burst of light, fractured the delicate veil between worlds. Unbeknownst to him, that single photograph shattered an ancient balance. Deep beneath the earth, in forgotten caverns where the roots of the old forest intertwined with secret rituals, something stirred, a malevolent presence that had long been held at bay by the unyielding traditions of Harrow's End. In the days that followed, a palpable dread seeped into every corner of the village. Shadows moved with unnatural grace, and an omnipresent murmur, like 1,000 whispered voices, echoed through the narrow streets. The villagers grew withdrawn and anxious, their once steady, ritualistic behavior now laced with an undercurrent of panic. One evening, as the crew reviewed Mark's footage, the full horror of their mistake became clear. The image of the faceless child had become a beacon. In its wake, the atmosphere thickened, and the land itself seemed to exhale a cold, ancient breath. Obadiah appeared before the crew, his eyes wide with terror as he warned, "The hollow god has been disturbed. It seeks what it has lost. It wants its face back." That warning proved prophetic. As night fell on a moonless evening, the villagers gathered at the stone altar in a final, desperate attempt to quell the rising horror. Their voices merged in a haunting chant, an archaic litany meant to seal away the entity they had inadvertently awoken. The ground shuddered beneath their feet, and a deep fissure split the earth open beside the altar. From that gash, a dark, viscous substance oozed, marking the threshold between the living world and the realm of ancient gods. Then, as if summoned by their collective fear and guilt, the entity emerged. It was a towering silhouette of writhing darkness, its form a shifting mass of shadows and tendrils. Where its face should have been, there was only an abyss, a void that pulsated with an insatiable hunger. Slowly, it advanced, as though drawn inexorably toward the source of its long-lost identity. Mark's heart pounded as he recorded the unfolding nightmare. The creature's formless gaze, as it neared, seemed to pierce through the camera lens and into the soul of every onlooker. Emily, her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her, cried out in desperate plea, "We did not mean to disturb you. We only sought to understand your truth." For a fleeting moment, the entity paused, its presence a heavy silence punctuated by the sound of the villagers' fervent chants. But mercy was not in the language of ancient gods. With a sudden violent surge, the creature lunged forward. Its tendrils swept through the gathered crowd, snatching at faces, both literal and symbolic. In the chaos that ensued, identities were torn asunder. The villagers' expressions contorted in anguish and resignation as they felt the weight of the sacrifice they had maintained for generations. Mark's camera captured only flashes of horror, a swirl of dismembered features, anguished cries, and the relentless advance of a being determined to reclaim what it had lost. By the time dawn's pale light crept over the horizon, Harrow's End lay shrouded in a heavy, sorrowful silence. The creature had retreated into the depths, leaving behind a tableau of broken tradition and shattered lives. The surviving villagers, their faces now eerily vacant and resigned, gathered in a somber procession. They moved as if in a trance, bound by an ancient curse and the unyielding cycle of sacrifice. The documentary crew, now forever marked by the events they had unleashed, could only stare in numb disbelief. Mark was haunted by the knowledge that a single act of curiosity had awakened an ancient terror. Emily, resolute even in the face of unspeakable loss, vowed to document the truth of Harrow's End for those who might one day need to heed its warnings. Sarah's notes, once a careful record of local folklore, now chronicled a horror that defied human understanding, a horror that had demanded its due in the currency of identity and sacrifice. In the final moments of their ill-fated documentary, as the camera panned slowly over the desolate faces of Harrow's End and lingered on the silent void where a child's face should have been, a whisper seemed to echo from the darkness. It was a promise, or perhaps a curse, that every 50 years the cycle would resume. The hollow god, ever watchful in its subterranean lair, would one day rise again, demanding its face back and exacting the price for human curiosity. And so, in a land where ancient pacts and modern inquisitiveness collided, the legacy of the faceless children became a timeless testament to the peril of unearthing secrets best left buried.